There's a funny thing about life, isn't there? You spend years building it up piece by deliberate piece like a craftsman lays brick. Not always grand monuments, mind you, but something far more personal and precious. A quiet kingdom. You pour the mortar of hard work, day in and day out, sunrise to sunset, the kind of labor that leaves calluses on your hands and a deep ache in your bones. You fit the timber of consistency, making sure the rhythm is steady, predictable. You add the glass of small comforts, a warm meal, a safe home, the sound of your family sleeping soundly down the hall. You build it not just with sweat, but with expectation. You start to believe in its solidity, its permanence. The rhythm of it all becomes a part of you. The alarm clock at dawn, the lunch packed, the engine turning over, the familiar drone of machinery, the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. This is your empire, you think. Not a sprawling dominion of land and gold, but the steady beat of your own pulse against the daily grind, the safety of a roof over your head, food on the table, the knowledge that you can provide. It feels strong, unshakable. You earn that feeling brick by brick, year after year. And maybe, just maybe, you start to take that strength for granted. You start to assume the foundations will always hold, that the walls will never crack, that the sky above will remain a reliable shade of blue. You forget that even the most meticulously built structure, one forged from the sheer force of will and honest effort, can face a storm it wasn't designed for. A tremor can come from deep underground, not shaking the earth itself, but the very ground you stand on. A single, unexpected gust of wind can find the weak spot, the unseen flaw. And sometimes what you thought was granite, What you thought was granite, what seemed unyielding as bedrock, could turn to sand beneath your feet in an instant. He was Vince, 48 years old, and a construction site was his second home, sometimes felt like his first. You'd see him there long before the sun had properly decided to show its face. The first one on the job, his Ford F-150 already parked by the stack of lumber. The truck, a 2010 model, wasn't fancy, but it was solid, reliable, just like Vince himself. He kept it clean too, cleaner than you'd expect for a work truck, a testament to the quiet order he liked to keep in his life. He was a man built for the work he did. Stocky, maybe 510, and a good 220 pounds with a barrel chest that seemed to hold steady against any wind and forearms thick as fence posts. His hands, though, those were the storytellers. Heavily calloused palms, scarred knuckles from countless close calls and years of gripping hammers, wrenches, planks of wood. His thick fingernails were usually rimmed with a bit of dust or grease, but his grip, when he shook your hand, felt like worn leather, firm, honest, no pretense. His face was a roadmap of the sun and the passing years. Squarish jaw, often tight with concentration, tired but determined blue eyes that missed very little. Sun-weathered skin, a permanent stubble he kept short but rarely clean-shaven. And if you looked close, just above his left eyebrow, a faint scar, a relic from some long-forgotten scrape, a reminder that even the careful can catch a stray nail. His hair, dark brown with about 30% gray, was closely cropped, neatly receding at the temples, but it was a battle he fought with dignity, not vanity. Vince didn't waste words. He was quiet, observant, preferring to watch and listen rather than fill the air with chatter. When he spoke, it was slow, deliberate, often in short, direct sentences that carried the weight of experience. He was tough, sure, especially when he was in charge of a crew, but fair. You knew where you stood with Vince, and you knew he expected the same honest effort he gave. At home, life was equally predictable, equally solid. A small, well-maintained house in an older, blue-collar neighborhood. Practical, tidy, a place where everything had its spot. Sarah, his wife, was 47, and they'd been through thick and thin. Their two kids, Michael, 22, was doing community college, trying to find his footing, and Emily, 19, worked at the local diner, saving up. They weren't rich, not by a long shot. Money was stable, but Vince was always mindful of every penny, a habit ingrained from years of making sure ends met. He was the provider that was his identity, his quiet pride. He took security for granted because he worked for it every single day with every fiber of his being. He had a hidden streak of stubborn optimism, a quiet belief that if you just kept pushing, kept working, things would sort themselves out. But underneath it all, a deep-seated anxiety hummed, a constant worry about providing, about what would happen if he couldn't. He never spoke of it, just worked harder, tightening his grip on the reins of his life, certain that his sheer will and calloused hands were enough to keep his little world spinning. He bottled things up, proud, almost stubbornly so, unwilling to share the weight he carried. That was his job, after all, to carry it. The alarm clock, a chipped plastic thing from the hardware store, squawked its tinny protest at 4:30 a.m., slicing through the quiet dark of his bedroom. Vince's eyes, tired but already focused, blinked open. No need to hit snooze. He was up before the sound fully registered, a reflex honed over decades. He swung his thick legs out of bed, the floorboards creaking a familiar tune under his 220 pounds. He moved through the small house like a shadow, a quiet giant ensuring he didn't disturb Sarah or the kids. The air was cool, smelling faintly of old coffee and the lingering scent of laundry detergent from yesterday's wash. In the bathroom, he splashed cold water on his sun-weathered face, rubbing at the stubble that perpetually clung to his squarish jaw. His reflection, framed by the dim light of a single bulb, showed a man whose dark brown hair, flecked with 30% gray, was already receding at the temples, but whose blue eyes held a steady, unwavering gaze. The faint scar above his left eyebrow, a souvenir from a dropped wrench years ago, was just another line in a face that told stories without words. He shaved quickly, efficiently, the rasp of the blade a small, intimate sound in the pre-dawn quiet. He pulled on his worn but clean work clothes, heavy denim, a faded flannel shirt, and a thick work jacket. His hands, even in the dim light, were a testament to his life. Heavily calloused palms, scarred knuckles from years of labor, thick fingernails that always seemed to harbor a speck of grease or dirt. His grip, even on the coffee mug he now carried to the kitchen, felt like worn leather, firm, unyielding. Sarah was usually stirring by the time he got to the kitchen, the soft glow of the under-cabinet light a beacon in the gloom. She'd have the coffee already brewing, strong and black, just how he liked it. A nod, a quiet "morning" was usually the extent of their early exchange. Words weren't necessary. She knew his routine, he knew hers. He'd sit at the small kitchen table, listening to the muffled sounds of the house waking up around him, the distant rumble of a garbage truck, the chirp of early birds. He'd eat his bowl of oatmeal, sometimes a piece of toast, thinking about the day ahead, the job site, the deadlines. He'd glance at the small stack of bills on the counter, neatly organized by Sarah, a silent reminder of the constant tightrope walk. Stable, yes, but one wrong step and they could fall. That was his constant, unvoiced fear. By 5:30 he was out the door, the cool morning air biting at his ears. His 2010 Ford F-150, a deep blue workhorse, sat in the driveway. It wasn't new, but it was meticulously maintained, its engine a familiar purr. He opened the door, the interior smelling faintly of sawdust and old coffee. The dashboard was clean, tools in the back organized, a testament to his practical, tidy nature. He turned the key, the engine catching with a reassuring rumble, and backed out into the still sleeping street of his blue-collar neighborhood. The commute was about 45 minutes, a familiar route that took him from the quiet residential streets to the outskirts of the city, where new developments were always springing up. He'd pass the diner where Emily worked, sometimes seeing her walking in, a fleeting wave if she caught his eye. He'd think about Michael, still in community college, trying to find his way. He wanted more for them, a life without the constant hum of financial worry. That was why he pushed, why he drove himself every day. The construction site, even at that hour, was already stirring. The sky was beginning to lighten, painting the horizon in muted grays and pale blues, a hint of the D08B4C orange of dawn on the horizon. Dust already hung in the air, a fine, gritty haze that clung to everything. He parked his F-150 in his usual spot, retrieved his hard hat and lunch pail, and made his way to the morning meeting. His presence was understated but commanding. He didn't yell or make grand speeches. When he spoke, it was slowly, deliberately, in short, direct sentences, laying out the day's tasks with a quiet authority that came from knowing every beam, every nail, every potential problem on a site. His thick forearms, powerful and scarred, were ready for the day's lift and haul. He was a practical problem solver, seeing the angles, anticipating the snags, often catching things others missed. "All right, crew," he'd say, his voice a low rumble. "South wall needs bracing. Peterson, you're on the crane. Johnson, I need those joists by 10. No shortcuts, fellas. We build it right or we don't build it at all." The work itself was a relentless rhythm of muscle and sweat. Lifting heavy beams, swinging a hammer with precision, guiding machinery, climbing scaffolding that swayed slightly in the morning breeze. He felt the ache in his back, the strain in his shoulders, but he pushed through it, fueled by decades of ingrained habit and that deep-seated anxiety he carried. He didn't complain, not out loud. He just kept moving. A dropped nail, a miscommunication from a younger worker, these were small frustrations. Met with a sigh or a sharp, clear instruction, never wasted anger. His loyalty to his crew was as strong as the foundations they laid. Lunch was a short, solitary affair, usually a sandwich Sarah packed, eaten sitting on a stack of lumber, watching the dust motes dance in the filtering golden hour light of the growing day. He'd watch the younger guys joke and mess around, sometimes offering a dry anecdote about a mistake he'd seen made once, the moral clear but unspoken. "Saw a fella try to lift that beam with just 2 men once," he might say, chewing slowly. "Ended up with a broken foot and a week of paperwork. Never pays to rush good work." The afternoon wore on, the sun climbing high, beating down on the site. Fatigue was a constant companion, but his determination was an unyielding force. Supervised, he worked, he made sure every detail was exactly right. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his barrel chest expanding with each heavy breath, his mind already 3 steps ahead, planning the next phase. This was his empire, built on grit and sweat. This stable rhythm, the surety of his hands, the predictable security of his family, he took it for granted because he had earned it every single day. When he finally clocked out, his body thrummed with a deep, satisfying ache. The setting sun cast long, D08B4C orange shadows across the half-finished homes, painting a picture of progress and the promise of a completed vision. The dust, now illuminated by the low light, seemed softer, almost peaceful. He drove home, the quiet hum of his F-150 a comfort. Dinner was usually lively, Emily sharing stories from the diner, Michael talking about his classes. Vince listened, offering grunts or short, direct comments, his tired but determined blue eyes scanning their faces. He loved his family fiercely, and providing for them was his core purpose. Later, after the dishes were done and the kids retreated to their rooms, he'd sit with Sarah, perhaps watching some old show on TV, the soft glow of a home lamp at dusk casting a warm, familiar light. He'd pick up a utility bill, look at it, then put it down, his mind doing the silent calculations. "You think you got it all figured out?" he'd think to himself, as he finally lay in bed, listening to Sarah's steady breathing beside him, the anxiety a quiet hum beneath the surface of his exhaustion. He had built this life brick by brick, with his own 2 hands, confident in his ability to keep it all together. He was a man who defined himself by his ability to provide, taking his stable, predictable working-class life and family security for granted. His empire was the steady rhythm of his work and the safety of his home, built on sheer effort. He had no idea how quickly that foundation could crack. He'd lie there, rigid beside Sarah's soft warmth, his eyes tracing patterns on the ceiling where the streetlights threw faint shadows. That quiet hum in his chest, it wasn't just about the bills, though they were a constant background drumbeat. No, it was about the path not taken, the roads he'd seen disappear into the distance years ago. He'd always been good with his hands, not just at hauling lumber and laying brick, but at seeing how things fit, how they could fit. When he was younger, just out of high school, before the real weight of responsibility settled in, he'd sketch. Not blueprints, not the dry, functional plans he worked with every day, but real houses. Homes with character, sweeping staircases in a grand foyer, built-in bookshelves reaching to the ceiling, custom cabinetry that looked more like art than storage. He'd even entertained the wild notion of architecture, or maybe fine woodworking, crafting furniture that would last generations. That was the dream he'd stopped talking about, locked away like a forgotten toolbox in the back of his mind. He remembered a precise moment, vivid in the soft glow of memory like an old photograph. He was 19, holding out a crumpled sketch to his dad, a man whose hands were just as calloused as Vince's were now, but who had never once thought about anything beyond putting food on the table. His dad had squinted at the drawing, a beautifully detailed bay window with leaded glass. "Looks pretty, son," he'd rumbled, handing it back. "But does it pay the bills?" It wasn't a criticism, just a plain statement of fact in their world. Vince had nodded, swallowed the lump in his throat, and the dream had been carefully folded and put away, replaced by the immediate, tangible path of construction. He understood. He still understood. But sometimes, in the dead of night, he wondered what if? What if he'd pushed back? What if he'd found a way to bridge the gap between pretty and practical? Now, with Michael in community college and Emily working at the diner, he wanted more for them. He wanted them to chase their own what-ifs, without the same gnawing anxiety about where the next meal or the next rent payment was coming from. He looked at his own hands, thick, scarred knuckles, palms like worn leather, instruments of labor, yes. But he wondered if they could have shaped something more delicate, something with a lasting beauty beyond the sturdy functionality of a foundation or a frame. The regret wasn't a sharp pain, more like a dull ache from an old injury, only noticeable when the pressure was just right. He prided himself on being solid, unshakable. He was the foundation for his family, and foundations didn't crack or show weakness. That stubbornness, that pride, meant he rarely spoke of these things, not even to Sarah. What good would it do? It was his job to absorb the blows, to solve the problems, to keep the ship steady. But he'd seen too many ships sink, too many families undone by a sudden storm. He knew deep down that the steady rhythm of his work, the safety of his home, it was all precious, fragile, a thin skin over something much deeper and more uncertain. His squarish jaw would clench, the faint scar above his left eyebrow catching a stray shaft of moonlight from the window as he'd silently instruct himself. No point dwelling on what didn't happen. Just keep moving, keep building. He'd repeat the mantra in his head until the words lost their meaning, until the exhaustion finally pulled him under. But the quiet question lingered, a shadow on the wall, a reminder that even the strongest foundations could hide cracks, and that sometimes the biggest struggles weren't with the world outside, but with the echoes of choices made long ago in the quiet chambers of his own heart. He was a man built to provide, and the thought of failing at that, of seeing his family's security crumble, was the deepest fear that kept him tethered to the edge of sleep. The fear, that cold whisper of uncertainty, often found Vince at dusk. It was a time when the last orange light of day, the color of old brick and settling dust, painted the construction sites he knew so well. One Tuesday, he was checking the newly laid joists on a second floor, the smell of fresh-cut pine thick in the air, a familiar comfort. His barrel chest expanded with each deliberate breath, his thick forearms, scarred knuckles, and calloused palms flexing as he tested a connection. The job was almost done for the day, the crew packing up. He just needed to make sure everything was buttoned down tight. He stepped onto a temporary platform, a sturdy-looking arrangement of planks and supports that had held up fine all week. A shaft of that soft, golden hour light, the kind that often makes a man pause and think about home, cut through the half-finished framing and landed squarely on his boots. His blue eyes, tired but always assessing, scanned the connections one last time. He felt a faint vibration, not unusual on a site, but then a groan, deep and guttural, that wasn't right. It wasn't the wood settling. It was the metal brace beneath, a dull, metallic shriek swallowed quickly by a splintering crack. Time seemed to stretch, thin as a wire. He saw it, a hairline fracture spiderwebbing across the main support beam of the platform, just above where it met the vertical brace. There was no sound from the crew below, just the distant hum of traffic from the street. His mind raced, calculating, assessing. He instinctively reached out not to save himself, but to grab the loose plank nearest him, hoping to prevent it from falling onto the ground-level workers below. That split-second decision. The platform beneath him gave way with a sudden, sickening lurch. It wasn't a gentle collapse. It was a violent, downward acceleration. His body, usually so sturdy and grounded, became a helpless weight. He felt the sickening wrench as his left leg snagged, twisted. The world turned into a chaotic blur of dust, falling wood, and the horrifying metallic screech of tearing fasteners. A sharp, blinding pain exploded in his leg, then his back. His head hit something hard, a brief flash of white before a wave of black threatened to consume him. He didn't scream. Couldn't. A grunt, a choked gasp was all that escaped his lips, even as the air was punched from his lungs. Then silence. Heavy, absolute, broken only by the settling creaks of the damaged structure and the ringing in his ears. Dust motes danced in the fading golden light, illuminated like tiny, slow-motion embers. He lay amidst the wreckage, a heavy section of the platform pinning his lower body. He tried to push himself up, his powerful arms straining, but a jolt of agony, sharp and searing, shot through him, making him dizzy. His breath caught in his throat. He couldn't move his left leg. It felt alien, detached, throbbing with an unbearable ache. His eyes, wide now, focused on the beam above him, then on the blue sky visible through the skeletal framing. Not on the pain, not on his own predicament. He pictured Sarah waiting for him to come home, the smell of dinner on the stove, Michael saving up for textbooks, Emily talking about her shift at the diner, and the thought, cold and stark, that hammered through the haze of pain, I can't provide, not like this. The very bedrock of his identity, his ability to care for them, felt like it had been ripped out from under him, just like the floor. The crew eventually found him, their shouts of, "Vince! Vince!" cutting through the daze. The panic in their voices was a jarring sound. His vision blurred, sweat mingling with the dust on his sun-weathered face. He could feel the blood, warm and sticky, seeping from a gash on his forehead just above the faint scar. I had to speak, but only a raspy whisper emerged. "Kids!" He managed, the single word heavy with all his unspoken fears. The ambulance ride was a blur of flashing lights, sirens, and muffled voices. The hospital was bright, sterile, a stark contrast to the rough, honest beauty of the construction site. Doctors moved with a quiet efficiency, their faces grim. "Severe crush injury," one said, his voice distant. "Compound fracture, tibia and fibula, spinal compression." The words were clinical, detached, but they landed on Vince like a fresh hammer blow with each syllable. "Extended recovery. You won't be able to bear weight for months." Months, the word echoed in his head, a hollow, mocking sound. Months without work, months without income. His truck, his tools, his hands, all useless. He was still in the hospital, pumped full of painkillers, when the first letter arrived at the house. Sarah brought it in, her face pale, her hands trembling. It wasn't from the company. It was from the hospital's billing department. A dizzying array of codes and numbers. A sum so astronomical it made his stomach clench. His company had cut corners, as he'd sometimes worried in the back of his mind, and their insurance coverage was woefully inadequate, leaving a vast, gaping hole that would swallow their savings whole and then some. The small print, the kind he'd always meant to review but never had, loomed large now, an unforgiving truth. His empire, built on sheer effort and the steady rhythm of work, hadn't just cracked. It had crumbled utterly and completely. He lay there, his body broken, his spirit reeling. His strong, calloused hands, now scarred knuckles, felt useless. The quiet question he'd always harbored, the shadow on the wall, had become a terrifying reality. He was flat on his back, staring at a ceiling, and the ground beneath his feet, the foundation of his whole life, had just disappeared. The old house was quiet, too quiet. 3 a.m. always felt like the deepest part of the night, when shadows stretched longest and fears whispered loudest. Vince lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the streetlights outside casting faint, rectangular glows across the plaster. Every joint ached, a dull, insistent throb that pulsed with his heartbeat. He tried to shift, to find a position that didn't pinch his hip or strain his back, but there wasn't one. He was pinned not by the heavy cast, but by a deeper, heavier weight. His blue eyes, usually sharp and observant, were tired, etched with a raw exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. The numbers on that hospital bill swam behind them, a dizzying, relentless tide. It wasn't just big, it was impossible. It ate through their savings, then through Sarah's small retirement fund, then demanded more, a monstrous appetite that threatened to swallow the very foundation of their lives. He could practically feel the cold, clammy grip of it on his throat. His home, his sanctuary, felt like it was slipping through his broken fingers. He clenched his heavily calloused palms, scarred knuckles pressing into the sheets. Useless. That's what they were now. These hands, which had built things, fixed things, provided for everything and everyone, couldn't even grip a hammer. He'd always defined himself by the sweat on his brow, the ache in his muscles at the end of a long day. Was the man who provided the rock. Now he was just broken, a burden. The word tasted bitter like ash. His square jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his stubble. Sarah, she tried to be strong for him, but he saw the worry in her eyes, the way her hand trembled when she poured his coffee. Michael, working extra shifts at the community college, trying to chip in. Emily, taking on more hours at the diner, sacrificing her own future for this hole he'd dug. It wasn't fair. He was supposed to protect them, to keep them safe. Instead, he'd brought them to the edge of the cliff. The thought was a sharp stab, worse than any physical pain, pride warred with despair. He'd always prided himself on solving problems, on getting the job done. But this was beyond a busted pipe or a collapsing wall. This was his entire world disassembled piece by piece. He swallowed hard, the sound loud in the quiet room. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor ran through his thick forearms. He wanted to scream, to lash out at the unfairness, but there was no one to scream at, nowhere for the anger to go. He just lay there, stewing in it, letting it churn and fester inside him like a bad weld. The plaster cast on his leg felt like a concrete block, anchoring him to the bed, to this helplessness. Every creak of the floorboards, every muffled sound from the kitchen, was a fresh reminder of the burden he was. His barrel chest, usually so strong, felt hollowed out, as if the very air he breathed was too thin to sustain him. He could almost feel the weight of every bill, every worry pressing down on him, suffocating the life out of everything he held dear. He stared at the ceiling, the plaster cast a relentless weight, a constant reminder of his sudden uselessness. His hands, usually busy, usually building, felt foreign, idle. They twitched occasionally, an echo of the countless times they'd swung a hammer, gripped a saw, or guided a measurement. Now they just lay there, the scars on his knuckles and the thick calluses on his palms, a testament to a strength he couldn't currently access. The thought of Sarah, quietly moving in the kitchen, making breakfast, making do, dug at him like a dull pickaxe. Michael was probably getting ready for his community college classes, Emily already at the diner, hustling. They were all still moving, still fighting, while he lay pinned. The morning light, thin and hesitant, crept through the blinds, painting stripes across the wall. Another day of being a burden. The silence, broken only by the distant hum of traffic or Sarah's gentle clatter, pressed in on him. He felt the panic, cold and sharp, clawing at his throat. He was Vince. He provided, he built. What was he now? Just a hole in the budget, a weight on his family's shoulders. He could almost hear the rustle of the medical bills, unseen but ever present like predators circling. A familiar knot tightened in his stomach. It wasn't just the physical pain, it was the shame. The pride he'd carried, the quiet satisfaction of a hard day's work, of knowing his family was secure, had evaporated like morning dew. He closed his tired, determined blue eyes. "Give up," a voice whispered, insidious and soft. "Just let it all go. What's the point?" For a moment, a long, terrifying moment, he almost listened. The idea of surrendering, of letting the current drag him under, felt strangely appealing in its finality. But then another voice, deeper, rougher, kicked in. It was the voice of the concrete mixer on a cold morning, the insistent rasp of steel on brick, the rhythm of a life defined by stubborn effort. It was the echo of his own father's words, long dead but clear as day. "You fall down, you get up, no matter what." His squarish jaw tightened. He wouldn't quit, not now, not ever, not with Sarah and the kids depending on him. He might be broken, but he wasn't destroyed, not yet. He opened his eyes, a renewed, almost fierce glint in them. The faint scar above his left eyebrow seemed to throb with the effort of his resolve. Gotta do something. It wasn't a grand plan, just a primal urge to asterisk move, to fight back against the inertia that threatened to swallow him whole. He shifted, the cast scraping roughly against the sheet. A grunt escaped his lips, a sound of effort and pain that he instantly tried to stifle. Sarah didn't need to hear that. Slowly, painstakingly, he maneuvered his good leg to the floor. The injured one, encased in plaster, felt like a lead weight, impossible to lift. He braced his thick forearms against the mattress, pushing himself up, one agonizing inch at a time. Sweat beaded on his sun-weathered skin, stinging his eyes. Every muscle screamed in protest. His barrel chest, which felt so hollow a moment ago, now burned with the exertion. He reached for the crutches leaning against the wall, his heavily calloused palms finding their familiar grip like worn leather. Standing felt like an achievement, a triumph over gravity and despair. His head swam for a second, the room tilting. He almost sat back down, almost gave in to the lure of the soft mattress, the darkness behind his eyelids. Just a minute, Vince. No one will know. But he swallowed the thought, his lips a thin, hard line beneath the stubble. He took a shaky breath, then another. The journey from the bedroom to the garage was a marathon. Each swing of the crutches, each awkward hop, was a conscious, deliberate act of defiance against the quiet hum of despair. Day 3 bled into his world like a fresh bruise, throbbing and relentless. The cast on his leg, now a familiar but no less hated burden, felt like an anchor, dragging him down whenever he tried to move. Each shallow breath was a minor victory. The world outside his bedroom window, where the morning sun usually called him to the rhythm of saws and hammers, now felt like a taunt, a vibrant life moving on without him. Sarah brought him a plate of eggs, her kind blue eyes, so much like his own, masking a worry he could read as plain as the lines on his own sun-weathered face. He chewed slowly, each bite a chore, tasteless in his mouth. What good am I like this? The thought, dark and insidious, curled in his mind, threatening to choke him. He stared at the ceiling, picturing the stack of bills on the kitchen counter, the one Sarah tried to hide under the grocery flyers. He thought of Michael, studying hard at community college, and Emily working her diner shifts, saving up for her own place. His fiercely protective nature, usually a silent strength, now felt like a lead weight in his barrel chest. He wanted to just close his eyes, let the pain meds pull him under, drift away from the crushing weight of expectation and the raw, physical agony. His jaw, usually set in quiet determination, softened for a fleeting moment into an expression of pure exhaustion. But then he gritted his teeth, the pain in his leg a dull roar joining the deeper ache in his soul. Giving up wasn't an option. Not for them. A week, 7 slow, agonizing turns of the earth, and he still felt like a caged animal. The initial shock had faded, replaced by a grinding, monotonous frustration. He managed to make it to the garage a few times, pulling himself onto a sturdy, 3-legged stool by his workbench, his old domain. The smell of sawdust and oil, usually a comfort, now felt like a ghost. His eyes, tired but determined, now seemed to just trace the familiar shapes of his tools without truly seeing them. He ran a heavily calloused thumb over the smooth, cold steel of a wrench, feeling its weight, its purpose, a purpose that currently eluded him. The world outside, the rhythmic clanging of hammers, the distant rumble of trucks felt like a cruel taunt. Around day 20, something shifted. It wasn't a sudden burst of energy, not a miraculous healing. It was slower, like the way a stubborn root finally finds a crack in rock. The endless hours of staring at walls, the forced quiet, began to grate on him more than the pain in his leg. His body was laid low, but his mind, that practical, problem-solving engine, couldn't stay idle for long. Sarah found him one afternoon, not on his usual stool by the bench, but propped up on a milk crate near a pile of old lumber, a pencil clutched in his thick fingers. He was hunched over a scrap of plywood, sketching. It wasn't anything grand, just a series of interlocking lines, a diagram for a shelving unit he'd always meant to build for the garage. His forehead, usually furrowed with worry, was now creased with concentration. The soft glow of the garage lamp caught the stubble on his jaw, highlighting the faint scar above his left eyebrow. He looked up, his blue eyes, though still tired, held a spark she hadn't seen in weeks. "Thought you might be needing this," she said quietly, holding out a mug of lukewarm coffee, the steam barely visible in the cool air. She didn't comment on the drawing, just watched him for a moment. "Good to see you." "Thinking again, Vince?" He grunted, a sound that might have meant agreement or maybe just acknowledgement. But she saw the corner of his mouth twitch, almost a smile. It was a flicker, but it was there. A few days later, his old foreman, Ray, called. Ray was a man of few words, like Vince, and even fewer sympathies. He cut straight to it. "Got a tricky support beam on the Oak Haven job. That old house is twisting on us. Thinking about how you braced that old mill in 08. Vince paused, the phone feeling heavy in his thick hand. For a moment, the old despair tried to creep back in. But then the familiar challenge of a structural puzzle, the kind of knot he used to untangle with ease, pushed it aside. "You gotta counterload the opposing wall," Vince said, his voice slow, deliberate, a little rusty at first, but gaining strength. He closed his eyes, picturing the problem, the lumber, the angles. "Temporary braces in a crosshatch pattern, then sister the main beam with a steel plate. Tie it into the joists properly, don't just nail it." He talked for a good 10 minutes, describing the process in detail, his mind working through every step, every potential pitfall. He forgot for a while about the throbbing in his leg, about the wheelchair tucked neatly by the door. He was back on the job site in his head, solving. When he hung up, a strange sensation settled over him. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. It was more like the steady hum of a generator kicking back on after a power outage. His barrel chest felt a little lighter, less constrained. He looked down at his hands, those heavily calloused, scarred tools of his trade. They couldn't wield a hammer right now, couldn't hoist a beam, but his mind, his experience, his know-how, that was still intact. That was still his. He pulled himself over to his workbench, his movements still stiff and slow, but with a new purpose. He wasn't just staring at his tools anymore. He was looking at them as possibilities. He picked up a broken drill, one he'd meant to fix for months. The quiet, unyielding strength that Sarah saw in his eyes was taking root again. He grabbed a screwdriver, his grip feeling like worn leather, and began to work. It was a small victory, just a few screws and wires, but it was a start. He wasn't just surviving. He was starting to build again, piece by agonizing piece. Weeks blurred into a steady rhythm of physical therapy, doctor appointments, and the quiet, persistent hum of Vince's garage. His barrel chest, still solid, moved with a newfound stiffness, and his thick forearms, though regaining strength, couldn't yet handle the heavy lifting he was used to. But his mind, sharp as ever, was working overtime. He'd fixed that drill, then a broken weed eater for a neighbor, then Sarah's old sewing machine. Each repair was a puzzle, a small conquest that brought a glint of determination back to his tired blue eyes. The F-150 sat in the driveway, clean as ever, but for weeks it went nowhere but doctor visits. He'd always taken for granted the rumble of that engine, the freedom it represented, the way it carried him to the job sites where he earned his living. Now, he spent hours just sitting in his meticulously organized garage workshop, sketching. Not blueprints for skyscrapers, but diagrams for accessible ramps, modifications for kitchens, ideas for small home repairs. He saw things differently now through the lens of limitation, and with that came an unexpected wellspring of practical solutions. "Dad, you need anything from the store?" Michael would ask, hovering by the garage door, worry etched on his young face. Vince would nod slowly, deliberately, his voice a low gravel. "Just some smaller gauge wire, and maybe some wood glue." He didn't ask for help with himself, asterisk, not often, not directly. That stubborn pride still clung to him like sawdust. But he was learning to accept help with the asterisk work, letting his family be a part of his quiet rebuilding. One evening at the dinner table, the soft glow of the home lamp casting long shadows. The air was lighter than it had been in months. Emily, home from the diner, chattered about a tricky customer, and Michael recounted a lecture from his community college class. Vince listened, his squarish jaw set, a faint smile playing on his lips. Before, his mind would often be elsewhere, preoccupied with the next job, the looming deadline. Now he was present, truly present. He watched Sarah, her face still carrying the weight of their ordeal, but less strained. He saw the flicker of worry in Michael's eyes, the quiet strength in Emily's, and felt a fierce protectiveness swell in his chest. But it wasn't the old anxiety about whether he could earn enough to keep them safe. It was a new kind of resolve, a commitment to find a way, no matter what. Neighbor down the street, Mrs. Henderson. Vince began slowly after a pause, his blue eyes meeting Sarah's. Her porch steps rotten, needs a new one, said she'd pay a fair price. Sarah's eyebrows rose. You think you can handle that, Vince? That's a bit more than a drill. He nodded, a slight wince as he shifted in his chair. Not by myself. Michael can help with the heavy stuff. I can design it, cut the wood, supervise. Emily can pick up the lumber after her shift. He looked at his kids, his gaze steady. It ain't about breaking my back anymore. It's about using what I know, using us asterisk. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was thoughtful. Michael exchanged a glance with Emily, then nodded. Yeah, Dad. I can do that. I got a few hours free on Saturday. Emily chimed in. Me too, Dad. Just tell me what kind of wood. A quiet pride settled in Vince's chest, different from the old kind. It wasn't about the size of the project or the money. It was about solving a problem, about contributing, about teaching his kids something real and seeing them step up. He remembered the feeling of that world crumbling, the terror of not being able to provide. But now, as he looked at his family, a warmth spread through him. They were the foundation, always had been. He'd just forgotten that somewhere along the line. The following Saturday, the warm, dusty golden hour light filtered through the open garage door as Vince, sitting on a low stool, meticulously sanded a piece of treated lumber. Michael was measuring a riser. Emily carefully organized a box of nails. Vince's heavily calloused hands, once solely instruments of brute force, now guided Michael's measurements with precision, his scarred knuckles pointing out a subtle warp in the wood. He was still the foreman, still the builder, but his methods had changed. You think you got it all figured out? Vince murmured, more to himself than to his kids, his voice low and deliberate. Then life kicks you in the teeth. It ain't about how hard you get hit, it's about getting back up. Even if you gotta crawl for a bit, you just keep going. That's all there is to it. He looked out at the fading light, his determined blue eyes reflecting the quiet hope